Today's story will move you, surprise you, and show the meaning of true respect. A retired black Marine attends his son's high school graduation. He had been looking forward to this day for years, not only because it marked his son's hard work, but because it was a milestone he and his late wife had always dreamed about together. The drive to the venue was long and quiet, with the Marine reflecting on memories of his boy, early mornings at the bus stop, baseball games after school, late nights of homework when exhaustion weighed heavy, but determination kept them going. His uniform, carefully pressed and spotless, was not only a sign of his service, but also a symbol of the discipline, perseverance and sacrifice he had tried to pass on to his son. As he stepped out of his car, people turned their heads, drawn to the mix of authority and humility in his presence. The Marine's skin told stories of sun and sand in far-off countries, and the way he carried himself showed the years of training and leadership etched into his posture. Yet beneath the surface of the soldier was a father simply trying to be present for his child. He held himself with quiet dignity, even as emotions swirled inside. Every step toward the school gymnasium felt heavier than expected, because every step reminded him that his wife was not there to share the moment. He had promised himself he would not cry today, but already he could feel the familiar burn behind his eyes. This day wasn't just about seeing his son walk across a stage, it was about proving to himself and his boy that despite everything life had taken from them, they were still standing. As he entered the crowded building, a wave of sounds washed over him: laughter, applause, chatter from excited families filling the bleachers. Students in caps and gowns moved nervously in the wings. He tried to blend in, but it was impossible not to notice the rows of eyes following him. Some were filled with admiration, others with curiosity, but none could guess the full story behind the man in the dress blues. He found a seat near the front, clutching his ticket in one hand, as though it were something sacred. It was his pass not just to an event, but to a memory he would hold forever. He breathed slowly, grounding himself. This was his son's moment, and nothing was going to take it away. His mind drifted to the night before. He had ironed his uniform late into the evening, polishing every button until it gleamed under the kitchen light. Each movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic, like a soldier preparing for a final mission. This wasn't about drawing attention, but about honoring the values his son had been raised with: respect, service, integrity. In that uniform he felt closer to his wife, to the life they had built, and to the promise of hope they had given their boy. He proudly wears his formal Marine dress uniform. It was the same uniform he had worn at ceremonies overseas, the one he had donned at the burial of fallen comrades, the one he had put on for the last time when he retired. Now, years later, it fit a little differently, but carried even more weight. The jacket sat square on his shoulders like armor, polished buttons catching the light from the gymnasium's fluorescent fixtures. The sharp crease of the trousers lined up perfectly with his polished shoe. Every detail spoke of precision and care, traits drilled into him during boot camp, but sustained over a lifetime of discipline. To outsiders it might have seemed like a simple choice of clothing for a proud veteran attending a special event, but to him it was a statement of respect, not for himself, but for his son and for the memory of his wife. He could have worn a suit or a casual shirt like many other parents, but the dress blues were a way of showing his son that this day was a ceremony, not just an event. They were a way of saying, "I honor you," without speaking a word. The uniform also brought memories rushing back, not all of them easy. He remembered his first day as a young recruit, standing at attention in a line of strangers. He remembered the deployments that kept him away from home during birthdays and holidays. He remembered holding his newborn son for the first time in that same uniform, rushing from base to hospital with barely enough time to change. Each memory clung to the fabric like invisible patches of history. As he took his seat among the crowd, he noticed the ripple of reactions around him. Some people smiled softly, others whispered, a few pulled out their phones. He was used to it. The uniform always carried a presence. But this was not about display. This was about belonging. In that uniform he wasn't just a veteran, he was a father showing up fully, embodying the values he had tried to teach at home. The framed photograph of his late wife sat in his lap, resting against the dark blue of his jacket. It was a quiet companion, a way of making sure she was present too. He ran his thumb over the glass absent-mindedly, his eyes fixed on the stage where his son would soon appear. He wasn't thinking of himself, or of what anyone might be whispering. He was thinking of how proud she would have been, how she would have clutched his arm and squeezed it at the moment their son's name was called. Every detail of the uniform reminded him of promises kept, promises to serve, promises to protect, promises to raise his boy with strength and honor. And as the noise of the graduation swelled around him, The Marine sat a little straighter, shoulders squared, eyes steady. This was a day of pride, of remembrance, and of quiet resilience. The uniform was not just fabric, it was a story woven in stitches and brass, a living testament to where they had been and where they were going. In his hand he carries a framed photo of his late wife, his son's mother. The frame is not elaborate, just a simple dark wood, with a slight shine, but it feels heavier than any metal he has ever worn. Inside the frame is a photograph taken years ago on a summer afternoon when life felt lighter, and their family seemed unbreakable. She is smiling in the picture, holding their boy when he was only a toddler. Her hair falling across her shoulders in a way he can still picture perfectly even now. He had slipped the photo into his bag the night before, wrapped in a clean cloth as though it were something sacred. Bringing it today felt less like a choice and more like an obligation, a way of making sure she did not miss the day she had longed to see. He can still remember the conversations they had about their son's future while sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. She would dream aloud of his graduation, his college plans, his first job. She had a way of speaking about the future as though it were already written, certain, and shining. When she fell ill, those conversations became quieter but no less full of hope. Even in the hospital she would whisper to their boy, telling him she would be there in spirit no matter what. The Marine thinks about those words now as his fingers tighten around the frame. The glass is cool against his palm, a stark contrast to the warmth of the memories behind it. Other parents clutch bouquets of flowers or small gifts for their children, tokens of celebration. His token is different. It is both a memory and a presence, a silent witness to what is about to happen. He knows some people may glance at it curiously, not understanding, but he is prepared for that. The photograph is his anchor, a reminder of everything they built together as a family. Without it the day would feel incomplete. With it, he feels as though she is sitting beside him, watching their son take his next step into adulthood. When he sits down, he places the frame carefully on his lap, adjusting it so that the picture faces forward. He does not hide it. He wants his son to see it when he walks. He wants his boy to know that his mother's love is still present, even if only in a photograph. The Marine takes a deep breath. The scent of polished wood and old paper rising faintly from the frame. It steadies him. Around him, the chatter of the crowd continues, but for a moment all he hears is her voice. Encouraging, proud, endlessly patient. He straightens his shoulders and keeps his eyes on the stage, thumb brushing over the edge of the frame as though it were a prayer bead. The graduation hall is full of families, students and teachers. Rows of folding chairs stretch across the gymnasium floor, lined up in perfect symmetry. The walls are decorated with banners in the school's colors, congratulating the class of the year, fluttering slightly with each gust of air from the overhead fans. The smell of floor polish mingles with the sweetness of flowers brought in by proud relatives. The buzz of anticipation fills the space like an electric current, voices rising and falling as people find their seats and exchange greetings. Parents hold cameras, programs, balloons. Children wiggle on their lap. Teachers in their robes stand off to the side, shuffling papers, calling names, adjusting microphones. In one corner, a student band tunes their instruments, the sound of brass and woodwinds adding to the atmosphere. Every detail feels heightened, alive with the energy of a moment that will not come again. The Marine takes it all in silently. He notices how some families lean close together, whispering, while others laugh loudly and take selfies. It is a portrait of ordinary joy, a scene of community and celebration. The stage at the far end of the hall is draped in heavy fabric, the school emblem stitched across it. Rows of chairs are set up for the graduates, each cap and gown creating a uniform sea of color and possibility. The graduates themselves fidget with their tassels, adjusting their mortarboards, stealing glances into the crowd to find their loved ones. From where the Marine sits, he can see his son near the middle of the group, taller than some of his classmates. His posture straight but his hands clasped nervously in front of him. The Marine feels a wave of pride as he watches his boy. It is not the kind of pride that shouts or shows. It is quieter, deeper, rooted in years of sacrifice and shared struggles. Around him, the crowd's noise swells and dips like waves. Announcements echo from the speakers, calling for everyone to take their seats. Programs rustle, cameras click. The Marine adjusts the frame in his lap, ensuring the photograph catches the light just enough to be seen. He sits still, blending into the sea of families and yet apart from them, a figure of composure in a storm of motion. He notices the little details others might miss. The nervous tapping of a foot on the stage, the way a teacher wipes her eyes as she looks at the graduates, The small child in the row ahead holding a homemade sign for his sibling. All of it mixes into a tapestry of celebration. He breathes it in slowly, as though trying to memorize it for his wife. As though he might describe it to her later in some quiet place where she can hear him. The hall is not just a building, it is a vessel holding hundreds of stories at once. Hundreds of hearts, beating with anticipation. Even as the ceremony prepares to begin, the Marine senses the weight of eyes on him. Some people glance at the uniform, some at the photo, some at the contrast between his stillness and the movement around him. He does not shift under their gaze. This is his son's day, his wife's dream, and his own quiet victory. He sits, surrounded by the sound of families, by the scent of flowers and polished wood, by the soft hum of a community gathering to honor its children, and he holds the photograph steady in his lap, waiting for the moment when his son's name will echo through the room. The Marine quietly takes a seat near the front to witness his son's big day. He chooses the aisle seat in the second row, because he wants an unobstructed view of the stage, a clear line of sight to the moment his son will cross it. He lowers himself slowly, the weight of his uniform and the frame in his hands making each movement deliberate. The metal buttons of his jacket glint faintly under the bright gymnasium lights, as he settles in, back straight, feet planted firmly on the floor. Around him, people shuffle for space, exchanging polite smiles or quick nods. He does not mind their looks. He has learned over the years to read curiosity without feeling small beneath it. He places the framed photo on his lap, resting his gloved hands lightly on either side of it. The seat feels too small for his broad frame, but he sits without complaint. His eyes sweep across the hall, scanning the stage, the rows of caps and gowns, the banners hanging from the rafters. He counts the steps from the curtain to the podium, imagining his son taking them one by one. His mind drifts to all the moments that led here. Early mornings with a lunchbox packed, long nights of tutoring at the kitchen table, stern words softened later with quiet hugs. A few people around him whisper softly, and he catches his name murmured once, though he does not turn to see who said it. Instead he focuses on the stage, breathing evenly, one hand brushing over the edge of the photograph as if to steady himself. He is aware of the way the uniform draws attention, but he does not shrink from it. He is here as a father first, a Marine second. The closeness of the front row intensifies the sounds of the ceremony. The squeak of shoes on polished wood, the low hum of the microphone, the shuffle of programs in eager hands. The Marine sits tall, shoulders squared but relaxed, projecting quiet composure. He glances at the empty seat beside him, and imagines his wife there, leaning in to whisper about how grown their son looks. He can almost feel the warmth of her arm against his. He adjusts the crease in his trousers, straightens the photograph again, and fixes his gaze on the hall seems to shrink around him, the noise dimming to a soft murmur as he waits. Whispers ripple through the crowd as people notice his presence. At first it is just a subtle shift, the tilt of a head, a curious glance from a few rows back, but soon the awareness spreads like a quiet wave across the hall. A mother nudges her teenage daughter and gestures toward the Marine, her expression a mix of respect and intrigue. A group of students whisper to each other behind cupped hands, stealing glances between the Marine and the stage. The sound of their murmurs blends with the broader chatter of the room, but its tone is different, softer, more measured, carrying an undercurrent of speculation. Some people recognize the uniform immediately, noting the rows of ribbons and the sheen of the polished buttons. Others simply see a man who carries himself differently, whose posture radiates something they cannot name. The photograph on his lap catches the light, and a few pairs of eyes linger on it, their owners wondering who she might be and why he holds her image so openly. For some the scene evokes admiration, for others uncertainty. The Marine senses it without looking up. Years of service have taught him how to read a room without drawing attention to himself. He feels the subtle shift in air, the way voices lower slightly when they think he might hear. He keeps his gaze on the stage, eyes steady, jaw relaxed. His breathing remains even. Inside though he is aware of the weight of all those unspoken questions. He is not ashamed of them, but he knows they can build tension in a space meant for joy. 2 rows back, a man in a suit whispers to his companion, and she nods, glancing toward the Marine with a small smile that carries both respect and curiosity. In another section, a student adjusts her gown and looks over repeatedly, eyes flicking between the Marine's uniform and his solemn expression. The whispers are not loud, but they move like a current, traveling from one cluster of people to another, drawing more eyes to him. The Marine adjusts his grip on the photograph, thumb brushing over the glass. He shifts slightly in his seat, not out of discomfort but to anchor himself amid the growing attention. He has endured rooms far more tense than this, but this is different because it is his son's day, not. He wishes the eyes would turn back to the stage, to the students who have worked for this moment. Yet he knows uniforms have always carried a kind of gravity, drawing notice even when the wearer would rather blend in. The hall's energy feels layered now, the excitement of families, the nervousness of students, and the low hum of curiosity around the Marine's presence. He keeps his focus forward, as if by sheer will he can redirect the attention back where it belongs. The whispers continue to flow softly behind him, a tide of speculation and respect that seems to hover in the air just above the joyful noise of the ceremony. He sits still, back straight, eyes fixed on the stage, his hands steady around the frame, holding on to the memory of his wife and the promise of seeing his son walk proudly into his future. Two security guards approach him with a stern expression. They move through the crowd with practiced steps, their uniforms neat but less formal than his, radios clipped to their belts, murmuring faint static. People part slightly to let them pass, curious eyes following. The guards exchange a brief look before stopping at his row, their presence casting a small shadow over his seat. One gestures politely but firmly, his hand hovering just above the Marine's shoulder without touching. Their faces show professionalism but also a trace of hesitation, as though they know this is not a routine situation. The Marine looks up slowly, meeting their eyes with calm steadiness, his posture unchanged, the photograph still resting on his lap, his grip on it gentle but unyielding. They politely but firmly ask him to step outside. Their voices are low but carry enough authority to be heard over the hum of the hall, measured tones meant to sound neutral, yet impossible to ignore. The first guard leans slightly forward, explaining in a few words that they need him to come with them, while the second stays just behind, scanning the room for reactions. Around them, conversations falter, the curious whispers sharpening into silence as people sense a shift in the air. The Marine tilts his head slightly, listening without interrupting, his eyes steady on the speaker, the photograph still balanced across his knees, as though rooted there, his body unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of his breath. The Marine, confused but composed, stands up without protest. He rises slowly, every movement deliberate, the weight of his uniform and the photograph making him feel heavier but also more grounded. His knees lock into that familiar posture from years of drills, back straight, chin slightly lifted, but his eyes carry a flicker of uncertainty. The frame in his hands is cradled carefully against his chest, fingers tightening just enough to keep it steady. Around him, chairs creak as people lean back to watch, and a low murmur rolls through the row. He does not speak, does not argue, simply meets the guard's gaze with calm restraint, his dignity wrapped tightly around him like a second uniform. Some attendees glance nervously, sensing tension. A mother squeezes her child's hand, eyes darting between the Marine and the guard. A teacher lowers her program halfway, lips pressed together, her brow furrowed. Students in their gowns shift in their seats, whispers rising like wind through tall grass. The atmosphere of celebration falters for a heartbeat, replaced by a stillness that feels heavier than the warm air of the gymnasium. Even the faint sound of the band tuning fades as heads turn. The Marine remains in the center of it, upright and silent, while the room seems to hold its breath. The Marine explains he is there for his son's graduation. His voice is low but steady, carrying the kind of tone that comes from years of discipline and self-control. He does not raise it above the murmur of the crowd, yet it cuts through because of its clarity. He keeps his words short and direct, not defensive but factual, as though presenting evidence rather than making a plea. The framed photograph is still pressed to his chest, one hand curled protectively over the edge. He looks at the first guard when he speaks, then at the second, his eyes calm and clear. People nearby lean in, straining to catch his word. He does not describe his service, does not mention his medals or history. He simply states who he is and why he is there. A father attending a milestone in his child's life. The air around him shifts slightly as he speaks. Some faces soften, a few shoulders relax, but the tension of the moment remains. The Marine's posture never wavers. His boots are planted firmly on the polished floor, his shoulders squared, the crease of his trousers still sharp even as his fingers flex slightly around the photograph. He adds a few more words, mentioning his son by name, his tone still measured, steady. He gestures faintly toward the stage where the graduates wait, his eyes flicking there for only a second, before returning to the guards. It is not a grand gesture, not meant for the audience, just a simple indication of connection. This is his son, his family, his reason for being present. Around him the crowd's murmur grows and then quiets again, like a tide rolling in and out. Some people nod faintly, whispering to their companions. A student seated on the edge of the stage glances over, his brow knitting as he watches the exchange. The Marine draws a slow breath, the kind of deep inhale soldiers take before a march or a speech, and exhales just as slowly, keeping his focus forward. He is aware of the stares, aware of the cameras of a few cell phones being raised, but he remains fixed in his small circle of stillness, stating his purpose, holding the photograph steady as if it were proof of something deeper than words. He has spent a lifetime explaining himself to officials, superiors, border agents, medical staff, and now to security guards at his son's school. He does it the same way every time, with respect, with patience, with the authority of someone who has served but the humility of someone who knows that service does not entitle him to special treatment. This time though, the weight behind his words is heavier. It is not about him being allowed to stay, it is about not disrupting the moment his son has worked toward. In his mind he can hear his wife's voice telling him to keep calm, to handle it quietly, to show their boy what dignity looks like. He stands with the photograph in his hand, eyes steady, words simple, explaining again, calmly, firmly, that he is here to watch his son graduate, that he is not here to cause trouble or draw attention, that he just wants to sit and witness the ceremony. The guards hint that his attire and presence are causing a distraction. Their words come slowly, almost rehearsed, as though they had debated how to phrase them before approaching. The first guard shifts his weight from one foot to the other, eyes darting briefly to the crowd before returning to the Marine. The second keeps his gaze on the Marine's uniform, his jaw tight, voice low but taut. They do not accuse him outright of wrongdoing. Instead they use vague terms, speaking of policy and concerns, glancing at the photograph and then away. The Marine hears them but does not react immediately. He lets the words settle, tilts his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Around them the audience reacts in different ways. A grandmother frowns and mutters under her breath. A father in the back row whispers something to his teenage son. A few people start recording quietly, the small red lights of their phones blinking like tiny beacons. The atmosphere shifts from quiet curiosity to an undercurrent of tension. The stage crew pause their movements. Even the students in the wings peek out from behind the curtain, sensing something unusual. The phrase causing a distraction floats above the noise like an echo, repeated in murmurs among the crowd. The Marine keeps his focus on the guards. His years of training taught him how to stand under scrutiny, how to face questioning without anger. Yet the words sting, not because of what they imply about him, but because of what they threaten to take from his son. He thinks of all the nights spent working overtime, the sacrifices made so his boy could have stability, the mornings when he ironed his son's shirt for school, while still wearing his own fatigues from a long shift. All of it so that this child could stand on that stage without fear or shame. And now, on the day that was supposed to be a culmination of that effort, he is being told that his presence is a problem. The guards speak again, explaining that some people have complained that the uniform and the photograph are drawing too much attention, that the administration wants to avoid any disruption. Their voices soften as they talk, as though they realize the weight of their own words. One of them glances at the photograph in the Marine's hands, then quickly looks away, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. The Marine notices this but does not point it out. He stands still, the photograph pressed to his chest, his eyes moving between the two. In the crowd, a mother shifts her baby to her other hip and shakes her head slightly. A student in a gown mutters to her classmate. The ripple of reaction spreads outward, but the Marine remains the center of it, his stillness like a rock in moving water. He does not raise his voice, does not plead, he simply listens, holding the photograph, while the guards explain again, their words blurring together into talk of policies, requests, distractions. Inside though, his mind races. He wonders if his son can see this from the stage. He imagines the boy scanning the crowd, noticing the commotion, feeling a spike of worry. He pictures his wife's photograph resting on his lap a moment ago, her smile frozen, and thinks of how she would have handled this calmly, gently, but firmly. He feels the weight of her presence in the frame, a silent witness to the moment. The guard's words hang in the air between them, a soft but persistent pressure. The Marine feels the heat of the gymnasium on his skin, the press of the uniform at his shoulders, the slick surface of the photograph under his fingers. He draws a breath through his nose, slow and deliberate, grounding himself. The eyes of the crowd are on him, on them, on the small circle of tension that has formed in what was supposed to be a celebration. He stays silent a moment longer, the guards waiting, the photograph against his chest, the crowd holding its collective breath, the energy of the room bending around their quiet confrontation. The atmosphere grows heavier as people watch the exchange. What began as a scattered whisper has now thickened into a dense quiet, the kind that presses against the skin and makes every sound sharper. The hum of the overhead fan seems louder, the creak of a chair more distinct. Conversations that had been full of laughter and clapping trail off, leaving only fragments of words hanging in the air. Parents who were leaning forward with cameras now lower them slowly, unsure whether to record or look away. Teachers on the stage glance at each other, their hands frozen mid-gesture as they take in what is happening below. The band members at the side of the hall hold their instruments a little tighter, their eyes flicking between the uniformed man and the two security guards. The Marine stands at the center of this stillness, a vertical line of composure in a room of shifting bodies. His uniform seems even more vivid under the bright lights now that the movement around him has slowed. The photograph in his hands glints faintly with each small shift of his finger. He does not move much, but his presence feels enormous, filling the space between the guards and the crowd. People can sense the tension not just in the scene but in themselves. A father further back clears his throat but stops halfway. A young girl fidgets with the ribbon in her hair. A grandmother presses a tissue to her lips without realizing it. The weight of the moment is not born of noise or confrontation, but of the opposite, its quietness. It is the held breath of hundreds of people waiting to see what will happen. In that pause, imaginations fill the gaps. Some wonder what the man did to deserve being approached. Others, catching sight of the uniform in the photograph, piece together their own narratives. A few simply feel an ache in their chest without knowing why. The Marine senses all of it, as surely as he senses the air moving around him. He has been in rooms before where silence meant danger, where stillness meant something about to break. This is not that kind of silence, but it carries its own weight, its own gravity. Even the graduates feel it from their seats on the stage. A boy in the third row twists his tassel nervously, looking at the floor. A girl 2 seats over whispers something to her neighbor, but the sound dies before it reaches the next row. One of the teachers places a hand lightly on the podium, as though to steady herself. The principal, standing near the microphone, glances down at a program, then back at the scene, clearly weighing whether to step in. The Marine keeps his eyes forward, the photograph held close, his back a straight line. He does not need to see the audience to know what they are feeling. He can feel the room like a single living thing, its pulse slowed, its breath shallow. The heavy air carries with it memories of other rooms for him, briefings in faraway bases, waiting areas in hospitals, church pews during funerals, all of them places where eyes watched and voices hushed, where the weight of expectation pressed down on shoulders already carrying too much. He draws in another quiet breath, his chest rising under the crisp fabric of his jacket, his fingers brushing the edge of the frame. The photograph steadies him, an anchor amid the swell of attention. He does not avert his gaze or bow his head. He simply waits, present and upright, as the room folds in on itself. The celebration paused under an invisible canopy of tension. Suddenly, 6 Navy SEALs in uniform, seated nearby, rise to their feet. It happens almost like a ripple, the scrape of one chair against the floor, then another, then all 6 standing as if connected by a single silent signal. Their uniforms are different but carry the same unmistakable weight of service. Rows of ribbons and badges catch the gymnasium light, their boots planted firmly on the polished surface. They are scattered across 2 rows but seem to move as one, their eyes fixed not on the stage but on the small circle where the Marine stands with the guard. The sound of their movement cuts through the quiet like a clean blade. People turn their heads sharply, mouths parting in surprise. A murmur sweeps through the crowd, not the earlier kind of whisper, but something charged, almost electric. The SEALs' faces are unreadable, their posture straight but not aggressive, the kind of stance born from discipline rather than confrontation. They step forward just enough to make their presence clear, their boots making small, measured sounds against the floor. Each one carries his own history, his own scars, but in this moment, they are a single presence. A wall of quiet solidarity rising behind the Marine. Their uniforms echo his but also contrast, a reminder of different branches bound by a common thread. A few of them have removed their caps and hold them at their sides, their free hands resting lightly against their thighs. Their expressions are not hostile but firm, their eyes steady. The crowd reacts in a wave. A father in the back row exhales sharply. A young man lowers his phone, forgetting to keep recording. A teacher near the stage brings her hand to her heart. The graduates shift in their chairs, their eyes widening. The tension in the room does not break, but it changes shape, charged now with something like anticipation rather than unease. People are not just watching anymore, they are witnessing. The Marine feels the change behind him, before he turns his head. He hears the subtle scrape of chairs, the soft thud of boots. He does not have to look to know what it means. Years of service have taught him the sound of men and women standing in formation, even in civilian setting. The photograph in his hands tilts slightly as he adjusts his grip, his eyes still forward but his breathing deeper now, the edge of his composure steady but different. The presence of the SEALs is not a spectacle to him, but a signal, a current of quiet support flowing toward him. From the stage, the principal takes a small step back, glancing at the gathered SEALs, at the Marine, at the guards. The crowd's murmur rises and falls like surf. In the corner, a small child points and tugs at his mother's sleeve, whispering a question. She shakes her head, eyes fixed on the men in uniform. The 6 SEALs stand at ease but unmistakably alert. They do not speak, but their silence has weight. It is not the silence of waiting, but the silence of bearing witness, of aligning themselves visibly with someone who stands alone. The guards glance at them briefly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing their faces. The Marine remains still, the photograph held to his chest, his shoulders squared, the soft light catching on the brass of his buttons, and the glass of the frame, while behind him the line of SEALs stands like a living backdrop of solidarity, a quiet wall rising between him and the weight of the room. The SEALs walk over and stand beside the Marine in silent solidarity. It begins with one measured step, then another, until all 6 are moving through the narrow space between the rows. Their boots make a low, steady sound against the gymnasium floor, a rhythm that cuts through the murmur of the crowd. People lean back slightly to make room as the line of uniforms passes, their eyes following every movement. There is no rush in the SEALs' pace, only deliberate motion, as if each one knows exactly where to go without needing to exchange a word. They spread out just enough to form a semicircle, positioning themselves so that their bodies create a quiet shield around the Marine. The air in the hall seems to change as they draw closer. It is not loud, but it feels like the shift that happens when a flag is raised or a prayer begins, a sudden tightening of focus. The SEALs are not towering figures, but they carry a presence that fills the space more than size ever could. Their uniforms are crisp, their faces calm, their eyes locked on the scene before them. Some hold their hands loosely at their sides, others clasp them behind their backs, a stance that signals steadiness rather than aggression. The Marine feels the warmth of their proximity even before they come to a stop. Years of service have taught him to read formations, to sense alignment without needing to look. He does glance at them briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement passing across his face, but he does not speak. He keeps the photograph pressed to his chest, his boots firmly planted, his gaze still directed forward. Around them, the audience watches with a mixture of surprise and respect, their whispers tapering into a new kind of hush. A woman in the 3rd row lowers her phone, suddenly aware that she is witnessing something intimate despite its public setting. A boy on the stage sits up straighter, his hands clasped tighter around his program. The SEALs take their final steps into place, their boots halting in near unison. The subtle scent of starch and polished leather rises as they settle beside the Marine, forming a human wall of quiet strength. Their silence is deliberate, like a vow. They do not reach out or touch his shoulder, but the line of their bodies speaks for them. It says without words that he is not alone, that his presence is neither disruptive nor unwelcome. It is a gesture learned not in manuals but in experience, born of deployments where solidarity was survival. The Marine straightens slightly, feeling their presence like a wind at his back, a reminder of a brotherhood and sisterhood that outlasts duty. The guards glance from one uniform to another, their expressions faltering just enough to reveal hesitation. The room falls completely silent as the powerful display unfolds. The shift happens like a switch being flipped. The low murmur of the crowd dissolves. The squeak of chairs halts. Even the distant sound of the band tuning fades to nothing. Hundreds of people seem to hold their breath at once, their eyes fixed on the tableau at the front of the hall. One Marine clutching a photograph, 6 SEALs standing around him, 2 guards caught mid-step. The silence is not empty but full, like the pause between thunder and rain, charged with an unseen current. Children who had been fidgeting moments before sit still on their parents' laps, sensing the weight of the moment even without understanding it. Teachers on stage exchange glances but do not move, their hands frozen in mid-air. The graduates lean forward in their chairs, their tassels swinging gently as they strain to see. In the back row, a man lowers his coffee cup slowly to the floor, not daring to break the quiet with the sound of it hitting the tile. The Marine feels the stillness settle around him like a cloak. He stands at the center of it, the photograph pressed to his chest, his breath slow and deliberate. He can hear his own heartbeat, the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath the weight of so many feet. The SEALs remain motionless, their faces calm but resolute, their eyes steady on the scene ahead. It is not a pose for cameras but a natural alignment, the kind that happens when people recognize something sacred unfolding and choose to honor it. The silence deepens until even the guards seem to feel it. One shifts his weight slightly, the leather of his belt creaking. The other glances at the crowd, his mouth opening as if to speak but closing again without sound. They stand not just before a man but before a living embodiment of service and sacrifice, and now also before a circle of comrades who have stepped forward without being asked. From the stage, the principal hesitates at the microphone, her fingers tightening around the edge of the podium. She knows she should resume the ceremony, but the air feels too thick, too reverent to cut with announcement. A student seated nearby presses a hand to his chest without realizing it, a reflex to the quiet gravity in the room. The hush is not uncomfortable. It is the kind of stillness that belongs to churches, memorials, flag-draped coffins, and homecomings at airports. It wraps around everyone present, binding them in a shared awareness that something larger than a graduation is occurring before their eyes. The Marine does not move, the SEALs do not move, the guards do not move, and the crowd watches, their silence carrying more weight than any cheer or applause could. In that suspended moment, the hall feels transformed. The banners above the stage seem to hang more heavily. The lights glow a little softer. People are no longer just parents, teachers, students, or guests. They are witnesses to a small act of unity and respect, a moment that rises above policy or ceremony. The Marine senses this without turning his head, the photograph in his hands grounding him, the silent wall of SEALs around him reinforcing his dignity. The silence lingers, dense and full, like a collective heartbeat waiting for whatever comes next. One SEAL speaks up, saying the Marine has every right to be there. The sound of his voice cuts through the charged silence like a steady drumbeat. It is not loud, not harsh, but clear enough to travel across the hall without a microphone. His tone is respectful yet unmistakably firm, the cadence of someone who has spoken under pressure before. He does not deliver a speech, he speaks a simple sentence, but the weight behind it makes it feel larger. The words settle into the air and seem to echo off the walls, drawing every set of eyes toward the line of uniforms. The SEAL steps half a pace forward, hands clasped behind his back, posture. His gaze is directed at the guards, not at the audience, as though the rest of the room has faded away. He is not challenging them aggressively, but stating a fact, a boundary that cannot be moved. The Marine feels the sound of that voice behind him like a pulse, steady and grounded. Years of service taught him to recognize when someone was taking a stand without needing to raise their voice or use grand gestures. The crowd reacts in a slow ripple. People lean forward, eyebrows lifting, heads tilting. Some exchange glances of surprise or relief. A student seated near the edge of the stage lets out a soft breath she did not realize she was holding. The teacher places a hand on her colleague's arm. The guards glance at each other briefly, their expressions tightening. The first one shifts his weight from one foot to the other. The second presses his lips together and looks down at the polished floor for a heartbeat, before lifting his eyes again. The SEAL does not move after speaking. His comrades remain at his side, silent but solid, their eyes trained on the scene, their bodies still as stone. It is a collective stance, a kind of quiet authority that needs no further explanation. The Marine keeps the photograph pressed to his chest, eyes fixed forward, but inside he feels the shape of the moment changing. The words spoken by the SEAL have entered the room like a key turning in a lock, releasing something that had been trapped. Around them, the silence shifts again, no longer tense but charged with the possibility of resolution. A woman in the third row dabs her eyes with a tissue. A father at the back crosses his arms and nods faintly. Even the students, who had been whispering moments earlier, sit straighter, their faces turned toward the front of the hall. The Marine hears none of the whispers now, only the echo of that single sentence from the SEAL, still hanging in the air like a banner. The guards hesitate, realizing the gravity of the moment. It shows first in their hands, the way one lets his fingers loosen on the radio at his hip, the way the other lowers his palm that had been half raised. Their eyes flick from the Marine to the SEALs, and back again, the rhythm of their breathing uneven for the first time since approaching. They are still trying to maintain composure, but the shift is visible in their posture. Shoulders that had been squared now angle slightly inward, weight shifting from one foot to the other, like men suddenly aware of the crowd's eyes on them. The pause stretches long enough for people to sense it. In the back, a chair squeaks softly as someone leans forward to. A child whispers a question to his mother and is hushed gently. The principal on stage grips the edge of the podium, Her knuckles. The guards exchange another quick glance, the kind that carries an entire conversation without words. This is different. This is bigger than expected. We need to think. One guard clears his throat, the sound small but sharp in the stillness. He starts to speak, hesitates, then closes his mouth again. The other shifts his stance, glancing briefly at the photograph in the Marine's hands before looking away. They are not villains in this moment, just men caught in a situation they no longer control. The presence of the SEALs, the Marine's composure, the silent weight of the crowd, all of it presses against them, altering the balance of authority they walked in with. Around them, the crowd's energy thickens but softens at the same time. It is no longer the brittle tension of confusion, but a growing sense of shared recognition, as if everyone understands at once what is unfolding. A moment of respect, a test of dignity. Parents lower their phones, students stop fidgeting, teachers glance at one another but do not move to intervene. The stillness becomes a kind of stage on which the guards must decide how to act. The Marine remains steady, the photograph anchored against his chest, his eyes forward. He has not spoken since the SEAL's words, and he does not need to. His silence is its own statement. The SEAL who spoke stands unmoving, his comrades forming an unbroken line at his side. The guards take in the scene, their jaws tight, their eyes scanning the hall as though measuring the weight of hundreds of watching faces. They hesitate a moment longer, the sound of their radios crackling faintly in the background, a reminder of the world beyond this charged circle. One draws a slow breath, his chest rising, then exhales, the sound almost lost in the quiet. The other adjusts his stance again, his boots making a small scuff on the polished floor. The weight of their hesitation hangs like a curtain, the crowd holding itself still, the SEALs waiting, the Marine steady, the photograph glinting softly under the light. The stage a sea of young faces turned toward the front, and in that moment, the guards feel the gravity of what stands before them, and realize it is no longer a simple matter of enforcing a policy, but something far larger unfolding in their hands. Slowly the guards step back, their shoes making soft deliberate sounds against the floor, as they retreat a pace from the Marine and the SEALs. The tension that had been wound so tightly begins to loosen as people watch the shift with quiet awe. Their expressions show understanding now rather than challenge, a silent acknowledgement of the scene before them. The Marine remains composed, the photograph steady in his hands, the SEALs still forming a firm line beside him, their presence like a wall of dignity. The crowd breaks into spontaneous applause, rising from their seats almost as one, the sound swelling through the hall like a wave. Hands clap. A few voices cheer, and some people wipe their eyes as they stand. The graduates look out at the scene, their faces reflecting something deeper than celebration, something like reverence. The Marine stays upright, the SEALs beside him unflinching, the photo glinting softly under the lights, as the applause rolls on. Thank you for watching A1 Storyteller, where every story reveals the strength and heart behind real moments. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to A1 Storyteller for more unforgettable stories of courage, respect, and humanity. Your support helps keep these stories alive and shared with the world.